The night I borrowed my mother's name, I thought I was saving her job. I never imagined I was about to change my own life forever. The alarm on my phone shattered the silence at 4:12 a.m., but I was already awake. Hospitals have a way of calling before dawn whenever life decides to test someone who already has too much to carry. I stared at the unfamiliar number for half a second before answering, my heart somehow knowing bad news traveled fastest in the dark. "Is this Emily Carter?" a calm voice asked. "Yes. Your mother experienced a medical emergency during her overnight shift. She's stable, but we'd like you to come to Mercy Memorial as soon as possible." Stable. It sounded comforting until I walked into the emergency room 45 minutes later and saw my mother asleep beneath crisp white blankets, and four taped to the back of her hand, her face somehow looking 10 years older than it had yesterday morning. The doctor explained it was severe exhaustion complicated by untreated pneumonia. She had ignored the coughing, ignored the fever, ignored the dizziness because missing work wasn't an option when every paycheck paid another overdue bill. Even lying there, she apologized instead of complaining. "I can't miss tonight," she whispered, her voice rough. "Mr. Lawson already warned everyone about attendance." I forced a smile that felt far stronger than I actually was. "Don't think about work, Emily." Her eyes filled before mine did. "If I lose this job..." She didn't finish the sentence because she didn't have to. Rent. Prescriptions. Utilities. The mortgage payment that somehow never got smaller. I squeezed her hand gently. "I'll figure something out." By late afternoon, after hours of paperwork, pharmacy visits, and convincing my mother that resting wasn't the same as giving up, I found myself standing outside our tiny apartment holding the black uniform she'd worn almost every evening for the last 6 years. It still smelled faintly of coffee, fresh linen, and lavender detergent. The embroidered name tag read, "Margaret Carter." I traced the letters with my thumb before pinning it carefully onto my own chest. We shared the same last name. Maybe for one night, that would be enough. The restaurant sat on the edge of downtown Manhattan, hidden behind polished glass and quiet confidence instead of flashy signs. Valet attendants greeted luxury sedans while elegantly dressed couples disappeared beneath warm golden lights. Everything about the building whispered money instead of shouting it. I took one slow breath before pushing open the employee entrance. The kitchen exploded with movement. Plates clattered. Chefs called orders. Steam curled toward bright ceiling lights. Someone brushed past carrying trays of fresh bread while another server nearly collided with me. Nobody seemed to notice that I didn't belong. At least not yet. A woman with silver-framed glasses looked up from a clipboard. "Margaret?" she asked without really looking. "You're cutting it close." "Traffic," I answered quietly. She nodded once. "Private event tonight. VIP guests. Don't make mistakes." I swallowed and forced another smile. "I won't." She handed me a tray and pointed toward the dining room. My palms instantly became damp. I had watched Mom carry trays hundreds of times. She always made it look effortless. Mine suddenly weighed 50 pounds. Beyond the double doors, crystal chandeliers reflected across polished marble floors while soft piano music drifted through conversations too expensive for ordinary people. Men in tailored suits laughed over glasses of wine older than I was. Women wore elegant dresses that probably cost more than my tuition. I reminded myself why I was here. Not for tips. Not for experience. Not even for pride. I was here because somewhere across the city, my mother was finally sleeping without worrying that tomorrow might take everything away from us. I just prayed nobody noticed the daughter wearing her mother's name. The first hour passed in a blur of polished silverware, expensive smiles, and whispered table numbers that somehow everyone else understood instinctively. I repeated every instruction inside my head before taking a single step. Water first. Bread second. Smile. Step back. Never interrupt. Never reach across a guest. Every movement felt borrowed, just like the uniform resting on my shoulders. I kept expecting someone to stop me and ask the one question I could not answer. Where is Margaret? Instead, the dining room carried on with effortless elegance. Crystal glasses caught the warm glow from the chandeliers, soft jazz drifted through hidden speakers, and conversations floated between investment portfolios, charity galas, and vacation homes I could never imagine visiting. I was balancing a tray of sparkling water when the atmosphere shifted so suddenly that even I noticed it. It was not loud. Nobody announced anything. There was simply a ripple moving across the room, subtle but undeniable. Conversation softened. Heads turned. Even the maitre d', who had barely acknowledged my existence all evening, straightened his jacket before walking quickly toward the entrance. 4 men stepped inside. 3 wore dark-tailored suits and quietly scanned the room without appearing nervous. The 4th walked between them with the kind of calm that made everyone else unconsciously move aside. He was tall, broad-shouldered without looking imposing, dressed in a charcoal suit that fit perfectly, his white shirt open at the collar without a tie. His dark hair was neatly combed back, revealing sharp features that belonged on the cover of a business magazine rather than in a room where people suddenly stopped breathing for half a second. He did not smile. He did not need to. The confidence surrounding him filled the restaurant more completely than the music ever could. I leaned toward another server. "Who is that?" She stared at me as though I had asked who the president was. "You really do not know?" I shook my head. She lowered her voice. "That is Adrian Moretti." Before I could ask another question, she hurried away carrying 2 wine bottles. The name meant absolutely nothing to me. He was probably another billionaire. New York had plenty of those. My section manager suddenly appeared beside me. "Emily." The sound of my real name nearly made me drop the tray. He frowned. "Margaret. Table 14. VIP service. Now." My stomach tightened. "Me? Do you see anyone else standing here?" I swallowed and nodded before lifting the tray again. Every step toward table 14 felt longer than the last. Adrian Moretti was not alone. His 3 companions spoke quietly among themselves while reviewing several folders spread neatly across the table, but Adrian barely glanced at the documents. Instead, he watched the room with patient, measured attention, noticing details most people ignored. As I approached, one of the crystal water glasses shifted unexpectedly when another server brushed past my shoulder. The tray tilted just enough for my heart to stop. I caught it before anything spilled, but one glass slid dangerously close to the edge. My fingers reacted on instinct, grabbing it seconds before it crashed onto the polished floor. A small breath escaped my lips. "I am so sorry," I whispered automatically even though nothing had broken. One of the men looked mildly irritated before returning to his conversation. Adrian said nothing. I carefully filled each glass, trying to keep my hands from trembling. When I reached his place setting, I became painfully aware that he was watching me. Not with annoyance. Not with amusement. Simply watching. Like someone trying to solve a puzzle that nobody else realized existed. I lowered my eyes politely. "Would you care for still or sparkling water, sir?" There was a brief silence before he answered. "Still is fine." His voice was calm, deep, and remarkably gentle for someone who carried so much quiet authority. I nodded, poured carefully, and prepared to leave as quickly as possible. Then, just before I stepped away, I heard him speak again. "You are not Margaret, are you?" Every sound inside the restaurant seemed to disappear at once. The soft piano faded into the background. Glasses no longer clinked. Even my own breathing felt too loud. I turned slowly to face him, convinced that someone had already discovered the truth. Adrian Moretti remained perfectly still, one hand resting beside his untouched glass of water, his expression impossible to read. There was no accusation in his eyes. No anger. Only quiet certainty. I opened my mouth, but no words came. Finally, I managed a careful smile that felt painfully fragile. "I am sorry, sir." His gaze never left mine. "Margaret has worked here for years." He spoke as though he were simply stating the weather. "She always recommends the sea base before anyone asks." You recommended nothing. Heat rushed into my face. Of all the mistakes I had worried about tonight, I had never imagined that someone would notice something so small. I lowered my eyes. My mother is sick. The words escaped before I could stop them. She is in the hospital. For the first time, something shifted behind his calm expression. It was not surprise. It was recognition. And you came instead. I nodded. I did not want her to lose her job. One of the men seated beside him looked up from the documents on the table. Adrian, the contracts. Adrian lifted one finger without taking his eyes off me. The man immediately fell silent. I had never seen someone command a room without raising his voice. Does the manager know? Adrian asked. I hesitated for only a second. No, sir. Why not? Because they would probably send me home. I forced a small laugh that sounded nothing like laughter. My mother needs this job more than she needs another problem. He studied me for another long moment before giving a slight nod. Thank you? I blinked. Sir? For telling me the truth. That was all. No lecture. No threat. No warning. I quietly excused myself and walked toward the kitchen, my legs suddenly feeling weak. I expected security to follow me. I expected the manager to call my name at any second. Nothing happened. The dinner service continued as though the conversation had never existed. I stood beside the stainless steel counter pretending to polish silverware while my heartbeat slowly returned to normal. Maria, another server, bumped my shoulder gently. You look pale. I am fine. You were at table 14. She looked at me with wide eyes. What happened? Nothing. Nothing? She lowered her voice even further. People spend years trying not to get his attention. Before I could answer, my phone vibrated inside my apron pocket. Employees were not supposed to check personal phones during service, but something told me I should look. It was the hospital. I stepped into the narrow supply hallway before answering. Miss Carter, the nurse asked kindly. Your mother is awake. She keeps asking whether you made it to work. I smiled despite the knot in my chest. Please tell her everything is fine. She also asked whether you remembered to eat dinner. My eyes burned unexpectedly. Even from a hospital bed, my mother was still worrying about me. I will, I whispered. Thank you. As I ended the call, I wiped quickly beneath my eyes before anyone could notice. When I turned back toward the dining room, I froze. Adrian Moretti had not returned to his paperwork. He was looking directly toward the hallway entrance. He could not have heard the conversation. The distance was too great. Yet somehow his expression had changed. It was softer now, almost thoughtful, as though the frightened young woman wearing someone else's name had become far more interesting than the important business waiting on the table in front of him. I looked away immediately, unaware that while I was trying to survive one difficult evening, someone else had already begun quietly asking questions about my life. The rest of the evening should have settled back into its familiar rhythm, but something invisible had changed. I could feel it every time I stepped into the dining room. Not because anyone treated me differently. Because I knew someone had seen through the disguise, and somehow had chosen to say nothing. I kept my head down and focused on my work. Refill glasses. Clear plates. Replace silverware. Smile. Breathe. Repeat. It worked until table 23 requested another bottle of wine. They were loud from the moment they arrived, celebrating some business deal that seemed to become more impressive every time they repeated the story. Expensive watches flashed beneath the lights as they laughed at jokes that were never particularly funny. I approached with the bottle tucked carefully against my arm exactly as my mother had taught me. Good evening, I said. May I refill your glasses? One man barely looked at me before sliding his empty glass forward. Another thanked me politely. Then the oldest man at the table frowned. His eyes narrowed as he looked at the name tag on my uniform. You are new. I offered a polite smile. I am helping cover a shift tonight, sir. Helping? He leaned back in his chair. Margaret never asked for help. I felt my stomach tighten again. She was unavailable this evening. He gave a short laugh that drew the attention of the others. Unavailable? Since when does this restaurant send replacements without telling paying customers? I remained calm. I apologize if there has been any inconvenience. There has. His voice became louder. We reserve this table every month because the service is predictable. Now suddenly there is someone who does not even know the menu. Nearby conversations began slowing as guests quietly listened. I wished the floor would open beneath my feet. I can answer any questions you have, I said carefully. Can you? He replied with a smile that never reached his eyes. Tell me which vineyard produced the Cabernet you are holding. I froze. I had memorized table numbers, not wine histories. My silence answered for me. The man shook his head dramatically. Exactly what I expected. My manager appeared almost immediately, wearing the strained smile reserved for wealthy customers. Is everything all right here, Mr. Whitmore? Not even close, the man answered. Who hired her? The manager looked directly at me. Margaret, what is going on? My heart pounded so loudly I barely heard my own voice. Sir? Answer the question. I swallowed. Before I could finish, another server quietly whispered something into the manager's ear. His expression changed instantly. He looked back at me with disappointment instead of confusion. You are not Margaret. Several nearby guests turned toward us. My face burned with embarrassment. My mother became ill this morning, I explained softly. I only wanted. You wanted to deceive the restaurant? He interrupted. No, sir. You came here pretending to be an employee. I was only trying to protect her job. Mr. Whitmore laughed loudly enough for several tables to hear. Protect her job? By lying? My hands tightened around the wine bottle. Please, I said quietly. My mother has worked here for years. She has never asked for anything. She only needed one night. The manager sighed impatiently. Emily, you should have gone home the moment you arrived. Hearing my own name spoken aloud made the room feel even smaller. I cannot pay people who do not actually work here. I lowered my eyes, fighting the sting building behind them. You do not have to pay me, I whispered. Just do not fire my mother because of what I did. For several long seconds nobody spoke. Across the dining room, Adrian Moretti remained seated exactly where he had been all evening. He did not interrupt. He did not react. He simply watched the entire exchange with the same calm expression that revealed absolutely nothing, while one of the men beside him quietly stepped away from the table after receiving the smallest nod, almost too subtle for anyone else to notice. The silence that followed felt heavier than the conversation itself. I could feel dozens of strangers looking at me without actually seeing me. To them, I was simply another employee who had broken the rules. They did not know about the hospital room that still smelled like antiseptic. They did not know about the overdue mortgage notice folded inside my purse or the tuition payment due in 3 weeks. They only saw a frightened young woman standing in the middle of an elegant dining room wearing a name tag that no longer belonged to her. I took a slow breath and looked at my manager. I understand if I made a mistake, I said quietly. But please do not punish my mother for it. She has never missed a shift unless she physically could not stand. He folded his arms. Rules exist for a reason, Emily. I know. You should have called. I tried. My voice trembled despite every effort to steady it. Nobody answered before the dinner service started. Mr. Whitmore let out another impatient laugh. Listen to her. Every excuse sounds more creative than the last. I ignored him and kept my eyes on the manager. You can send me home. You can refuse to pay me. I am not asking for anything. I swallowed the lump rising in my throat. I only came because my mother spent 6 years building trust here. She kept saying she could not afford to lose this job. I thought if the tables were served and nobody noticed, she would have one less thing to worry about while she recovered. The manager sighed, clearly uncomfortable now that nearby guests had stopped pretending not to listen. This is not how restaurants operate. I understand. You cannot simply replace an employee. I know. Then why did you? For a moment I considered lying again. Saying I had panicked. Saying I had misunderstood. Instead I answered with the only truth that mattered. Because I love my mother more than I fear losing tonight. The words escaped before I could stop them. The room became impossibly quiet. Even Mr. Whitmore stopped smiling. I reached into my apron pocket and carefully removed the folded envelope containing the cash I had saved from my fall semester textbooks. I had counted it 3 times the night before. Every dollar had taken weeks to earn. I placed it gently on the service station beside us. If the restaurant believes I caused financial damage, please keep this. The manager stared at the envelope. What is that? Everything I have saved. Emily. Please. My eyes filled despite my best efforts. My mother would never ask anyone for sympathy. She taught me that if we make life harder for someone else, we should try to make it right. I cannot fix everything, but I can leave this. The manager looked almost embarrassed now, as though he had expected an argument instead of an apology. Before he could respond, my phone vibrated again. I glanced down and saw another message from the hospital. Pharmacy approval pending. Medication not yet released. Estimated balance due upon discharge. My chest tightened. I quickly locked the screen before anyone else could read it, but not before the manager caught the worried expression on my face. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and forced another small smile. I should leave. I whispered. Thank you for giving my mother so many years here. I removed Margaret Carter's name tag from my uniform with shaking fingers. Holding it in my palm suddenly felt far heavier than a small piece of embroidered plastic should. As I carefully placed it beside the envelope, I became aware of movement across the room. The man who had quietly left Adrian Moretti's table several minutes earlier returned and leaned down beside him, speaking only a few words. Adrian listened without interrupting. Then he looked directly at me once again. His expression did not change, but something in his eyes suggested the conversation he had just heard had confirmed exactly what he had been trying to discover all evening. My fingers had barely left the embroidered name tag when I heard a chair slide quietly across the polished floor. It was not loud, yet somehow every conversation in the restaurant faded again. I looked up instinctively. Adrian Moretti stood with the same calm confidence he had carried since the moment he walked through the front door. He adjusted the cuff of his jacket once before taking a slow step forward. Nobody tried to stop him. Nobody even seemed surprised that he had decided to leave his table in the middle of dinner. The 3 men who had arrived with him remained seated, watching silently. Adrian crossed the dining room without rushing, each measured step somehow making the room feel smaller. He stopped beside the service station where my mother's name tag and the envelope of my savings still rested untouched. His eyes settled briefly on the envelope before lifting toward my manager. Who is responsible for this restaurant tonight? His voice was calm, almost conversational, but every employee within earshot immediately straightened. My manager stepped forward. That would be me, sir. Adrian gave a slight nod. Good. He glanced once toward Mr. Whitmore, who suddenly looked much less comfortable than he had only moments earlier. Then perhaps you can answer a question. Of course. Adrian rested one hand lightly against the back of an empty chair. How many years has Margaret Carter worked here? The manager blinked. 6 years, sir. Has she ever received a formal complaint? No. Has she ever failed to show up without explanation? No, sir. Adrian nodded once more. Has she earned the trust of this establishment? Yes. Then tonight, after 6 years of loyalty, her daughter attempted to protect that reputation while her mother was lying in a hospital bed. The dining room remained perfectly still. Nobody interrupted. Adrian continued in the same, even tone. Tell me which part deserves public humiliation. The manager opened his mouth but found no answer waiting. Adrian looked toward the envelope beside my name tag. She offered you everything she owns because she believed honesty required sacrifice. His eyes returned to the manager. How much did this restaurant lose tonight? Sir, technically, nothing. Nothing? Adrian repeated. No broken equipment? No. No unpaid tables? No. No customer left without service? The manager swallowed. No, sir. Adrian inclined his head slightly. Interesting. He looked around the room before speaking again. Then I have witnessed a young woman apologize repeatedly for a loss that never occurred. Nobody moved. Even the soft piano had stopped. Mr. Whitmore cleared his throat. With respect, rules are rules. Adrian turned toward him with remarkable composure. They are. His expression never hardened, yet somehow the older man immediately fell silent. Rules protect standards, Adrian continued. They should never replace judgment. He picked up the small embroidered name tag from the counter with surprising care, brushing an invisible speck of dust from its edge before placing it gently back where it belonged. Margaret Carter spent 6 years earning this name. Then he looked directly at me. Her daughter spent one evening proving she deserves to carry it. I felt every eye in the room turn toward me again, but this time the silence felt different. It no longer carried embarrassment. It carried expectation. Adrian faced the manager once more. The young lady is returning to work. The manager hesitated. Sir? Adrian did not raise his voice. She stays. 2 simple words. Nothing more. Yet the uncertainty disappeared from every face around us, as though the decision had already become permanent. I stared at him, unable to understand why a complete stranger had chosen to stand beside someone he had met less than 2 hours earlier, while Adrian simply adjusted his jacket again, as calm as though he had done nothing unusual at all. For several seconds, nobody moved. The entire dining room seemed suspended between one moment and the next, waiting to see who would challenge the quiet certainty in Adrian Moretti's voice. Nobody did. My manager looked from Adrian to me and back again, his confidence dissolving beneath the weight of a decision that suddenly no longer felt like his alone. Before he could speak, the restaurant owner hurried out from a private office near the entrance. I recognized him only from the framed photographs hanging in the hallway. Richard Lawson rarely appeared on the dining room floor, especially during private events. Yet now he walked quickly across the marble tiles, adjusting his suit jacket with the nervous smile of someone trying to repair damage before it spread. Mr. Moretti, he said warmly, extending his hand. I was not aware you were here tonight. Adrian shook his hand politely. Good evening, Richard. There was no tension between them, only the unmistakable familiarity of 2 men who had crossed paths many times before. Richard glanced toward me, then toward the envelope and name tag still resting on the service station. Has there been some misunderstanding? Adrian answered before anyone else could. A loyal employee became ill. Her daughter stepped in because she believed protecting her mother's reputation mattered more than protecting her own comfort. He paused briefly. I failed to see where that deserves punishment. Richard's expression changed almost immediately. He turned toward my manager. Is that what happened? My manager hesitated. More or less. More or less? Richard repeated. Did Margaret Carter authorize this? No. Did Emily steal anything? No. Did she damage property? No. Did customers go without service? No, sir. Richard exhaled slowly before looking at me with a kindness that had been completely absent only minutes earlier. Miss Carter, I owe you an apology. I stared at him, convinced I had misheard. You came here trying to protect your mother during a family emergency. Whether the decision was technically correct is one discussion. The way we handled it is another. He looked briefly toward the surrounding guests who were still quietly watching. That should have happened privately. My throat tightened. I had prepared myself to leave through the employee entrance carrying nothing but embarrassment. An apology had never crossed my mind. Richard picked up the envelope of savings and gently placed it back into my hands. Your money belongs with you. I tried to refuse. Please, He smiled softly. Use it for school. Or for your mother. That is where it belongs. Mr. Whitmore suddenly pushed back his chair. Surely we are not rewarding dishonesty. Richard faced him with calm professionalism. We are recognizing character. The older man frowned but said nothing further. Adrian remained silent throughout the exchange, allowing the owner to finish speaking before adding only one sentence. People remember how they are treated on the hardest day of their lives. The words settled over the room with remarkable simplicity. Richard nodded slowly. You are absolutely right. He turned back toward me. Margaret's position is secure. She may take whatever time her physician recommends. We will make the schedule work. My eyes filled instantly. Thank you. And Emily. He smiled for the first time that evening. If you are willing, we would be grateful if you finished tonight's shift. This time under your own name. One of the servers hurried over carrying a blank employee badge and a marker. She removed my mother's name tag with gentle hands before carefully writing 2 simple words across the new badge. Emily Carter. She smiled as she pinned it neatly onto my uniform. Looking down at my own name resting over my heart, I realized it somehow felt lighter than pretending to be someone else ever had. When I looked back toward Adrian to thank him, I found him already returning quietly to his table, as though restoring one stranger's dignity had been no more extraordinary than ordering another glass of water. By the time the last dessert left the kitchen, the restaurant had found its rhythm again, but nothing inside me felt the same. My new name tag rested against my uniform with a quiet honesty that somehow gave me more confidence than I had carried all evening. Guests smiled as I refilled their coffee. A few even thanked me by name. Emily. Hearing it spoken aloud without fear felt like taking my first full breath in hours. Every so often, my eyes drifted toward table 14. Adrian Moretti had returned to his discussion as though nothing unusual had happened. Papers moved neatly across the table. His companions reviewed documents while he listened more than he spoke. From where I stood, he looked less like someone who had just changed the course of a stranger's evening and more like a man finishing another ordinary business meeting. That puzzled me more than anything else. Most people who helped someone wanted recognition. He seemed determined to avoid it. Near closing time, Richard Lawson approached me again. Emily, he said kindly, you handled yourself with remarkable grace tonight. I smiled. Thank you for giving me another chance. He shook his head. You earned it. He hesitated for a moment before adding. Your mother has spoken about you for years. She always said you were studying nursing because you wanted to care for people the way others had cared for your late father. I lowered my eyes. She talks too much. Richard laughed softly. No. She talks because she is proud. His words stayed with me long after he walked away. Proud. It had been a long time since I believed I had given my mother a reason to feel that way. As I gathered empty glasses from a nearby table, Maria hurried over carrying her phone. Emily, she whispered excitedly. Do you seriously not know who that man is? She glanced discreetly toward Adrian's table. I told you I had never heard of him. She looked completely shocked. Search his name after work. Why? Just trust me. Before I could ask another question, she was called back into the kitchen. Curiosity lingered in my mind, but there was no time to think about it. The evening finally came to an end. Chairs were returned beneath tables. Candles were extinguished one by one. Staff members exchanged tired smiles after surviving another busy night. I carefully folded my apron and thanked everyone who had shown me kindness despite the difficult beginning. As I reached for my coat near the employee entrance, I noticed a small white envelope resting on the bench beneath it. There was no stamp. No logo. Only my name written neatly across the front. Emily Carter. I looked around. Did someone leave this for me? A dishwasher shrugged. Maria shook her head. It was not there 5 minutes ago. My pulse quickened as I opened the envelope. Inside was a simple folded card. There were no signatures. No company letterhead. Only one short handwritten sentence. Your mother should focus on getting well. Keep showing up as yourself. I read the line twice. Then a third time. There was nothing else inside. No business card. No explanation. I instinctively turned toward the dining room. Table 14 was empty. Adrian Moretti and everyone with him had already left. The polished crystal glasses had been cleared away, the chairs carefully tucked beneath the table as though they had never been occupied at all. I slipped the note carefully into my purse beside my mother's hospital paperwork. As I stepped outside, cool Manhattan air greeted me, carrying the distant sound of traffic beneath a sky painted with thousands of city lights. Across the street, a line of dark vehicles waited quietly at the curb. One by one they pulled away into the night without a single horn or unnecessary display. I watched until the last taillight disappeared around the corner, still believing the greatest gift I had received that evening was the chance to keep my mother's job, never realizing that somewhere beyond my sight, someone had already decided that protecting my family would not end when the restaurant closed for the night. 1 week later, life looked almost ordinary again, but ordinary had become something I no longer took for granted. My mother was back home, still recovering, wrapped in a soft blanket beside the living room window where the afternoon sunlight always found her first. The cough had nearly disappeared, and for the first time in months she laughed without immediately running out of breath. Every morning before leaving for classes, I made her breakfast, reminded her to take her medication, and promised that I would answer every call if she needed anything. She still insisted she would return to work as soon as her doctor allowed it. I still insisted she would not. Then, on Friday afternoon, my phone rang while I was leaving my anatomy lecture. The screen showed the hospital's billing office. My heart sank instantly. I stepped outside into the cool autumn air before answering. "Miss Carter?" a cheerful woman asked. "Yes. We are calling regarding your mother's account." I closed my eyes for a moment, already calculating how many extra shifts I could work each week. "I understand," I replied quietly. "I will arrange a payment plan." There was a brief silence before the woman spoke again. "There will not be a need for one." I frowned. "I am sorry." "The balance has been paid in full." I stopped walking. Students continued passing around me, laughing between classes, completely unaware that my entire world had just frozen. "Paid?" I whispered. "Yes, ma'am. Every outstanding charge, including medications, follow-up appointments, and rehabilitation services. There has to be a mistake." "There is no mistake." My voice barely worked. "Who paid it?" "I am afraid the donor requested complete privacy." I thanked her automatically before ending the call, but I remained standing on the sidewalk long after the screen had gone dark. There was only one person who had known enough to understand exactly what my family was facing. That evening I showed my mother the statement marked paid in full. She stared at it for nearly a minute before carefully folding it and placing it beside our family photographs. "Whoever did this," she whispered, "did not help because they wanted applause." I nodded slowly. "I think I know." She looked at me with a gentle smile. "Then perhaps thank them by becoming the woman you already wanted to be." A few days later, Richard Lawson called and asked whether I could help during another private dinner while my mother continued resting. This time I wore my own name proudly. I no longer felt like an imposter hiding inside someone else's uniform. Near the end of the evening, I carried a pot of fresh coffee toward a familiar table. Adrian Moretti was sitting alone, looking out through the restaurant windows at the lights of Manhattan shimmering across the wet streets after a light rain. I poured his coffee carefully before gathering the courage to speak. "Sir?" He looked up with the same calm expression I remembered. "How is your mother?" My breath caught. He had not asked whether she recovered. He had not asked whether she returned to work. He remembered her. "She is getting stronger every day," I answered. "That is good to hear." I hesitated before asking the question that had lived quietly inside my heart all week. "Was it you?" A faint smile appeared, almost too small to notice. "Does the answer change your mother's recovery?" I lowered my eyes. "No." "Then keep your gratitude where it belongs." He stood, buttoned his jacket, and prepared to leave. As he reached the doorway, He paused for only a moment. Your mother spent years serving people without expecting anything in return. Perhaps the world simply decided it was finally her turn. Then he walked into the evening without another word. I never received a confession. I never found a receipt. I never saw proof beyond a paid hospital bill and one unforgettable act of kindness. But sometimes the most powerful people are not remembered because everyone fears them. They are remembered because, when nobody else was looking, they quietly reminded one exhausted daughter that compassion will always outlast power, and that night I learned something money could never buy. A great person is not measured by what they own, but by how gently they change someone else's life.